Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Let's do it. Hey guys, Epic History TV, new video. I would watch any video on any subject that they put out. They're such a great channel. And this is American history, which I'm honestly not as knowledgeable as you might expect. I've learned a bit more. Like, I watch some American history podcasts, like Civil War stuff, American Revolution stuff, but I'm definitely going to have some stuff I'm going to learn here. So let's get started. Original link to the video from Epic History, top of the description.
1763. The 7 Years' War.
Oh, the narrator's back.
1763. The 7 Years' War, a global conflict fought by European powers, is at an end. And the British Empire has emerged victorious. Dominating its French and Spanish rivals, it claims new territory in India, the West Indies, and above all, North America. France must accept the loss of nearly all its colonies. 3 million square miles of land, comparable in size to all Europe.
Wow. What happened to French control of Louisiana? I thought, like 5 centuries later, Napoleon sold it to the USA.
The British now rule an empire on which the sun never sets. But in victory, the seeds of future conflict are sown. The enormous cost of the war has ballooned Britain's national debt. Interest payments alone consume more than half its annual spending. And the vast new territories in America will need defending from bitter...
Well, even when I see a lot of like money totals in centuries past or further back in history, obviously they're going to be lower because of inflation. But often, even when I see a lot of historical money totals change to inflation, they still seem a little less than what I would expect today. But that's $2.6 trillion. And that is a lot even by today's standards. So, and I know it's with inflation, but even with inflation, sometimes it's lower than I expect. Not this time.
The vast new territories in America will need defending from bitter imperial rivals who will look for any chance to reverse Britain's gains. Native American tribes also pose a threat, especially those that are former allies of the French. In 1763, Chief Pontiac of the Odawa leads a revolt against the British. There is bloodshed along the frontier as every British fort west of the Appalachians comes under attack. But the greatest challenge will come not from external enemies, but from the very colonies Britain seeks to protect.
What then is the American, this new man? He is an American who, leaving behind him all his ancient prejudices and manners, receives new ones from the new mode of life he has embraced. Hector St. John de Crevecoeur, American farmer.
157 years have passed since the first British colony was founded in North America. Now, there are 26 British colonies in North America and the West Indies. 13 of these lie along America's eastern seaboard, where after years of prosperity and immigration, the population has passed 2 million. Arguably, there is more that divides these 13 colonies than unites them. Each has its own distinct character, history, and form of government. Several were founded by those seeking religious freedom in the New World. The Puritans who settled Massachusetts, the Catholics of Maryland, and Quakers of Pennsylvania. Each colony has its share of rugged pioneers and economic opportunists, enticed by promises of plentiful land. But there are also many who arrive destitute, desperate, or against their will. Slavery is legal in all 13 colonies. In the north, enslaved Africans are a small minority, about 5% of the population.
Oh my God, Virginia. Is there any state where the slave population actually outnumbers? Almost Georgia. Oh wow, South Carolina. Yeah, South Carolina is the only one, and by quite a margin.
In the south, the economy is dominated by slave plantations that grow rice, tobacco, and indigo.
Wait a second, this... Okay. Rhode Island, not great. That's my state, and it seems like we have the biggest percentage to our population in New England. Not good.
But in the south, the economy is dominated by slave plantations that grow rice, tobacco, and indigo. In Virginia, African slaves make up around 40% of the population. In South Carolina, 60%. Early settlers had been overwhelmingly from England, but in recent decades, the picture has begun to change, with more immigrants from Ireland, Scotland, and Germany. All have helped to shape a new American culture, which makes a sharp impression on visitors. It is less deferential, more enterprising, increasingly self-confident. Old ties with the motherland are not what they used to be. For most of their history, the relationship between the British government and its American colonies has been one of salutary neglect. The colonies had been largely left to manage their own affairs, while Britain focused on more lucrative possessions in the West Indies and India. But this is about to change. Britain faces an extraordinary debt crisis, and many expect the colonies to help meet the cost of their own defense. It seems a reasonable expectation. The average American's tax burden is a fraction of that paid by the average Briton. By one calculation, a Briton pays 26 shillings a year in tax. A New Englander, 1 shilling.
Jesus.
But it is the...
I was about to say, well, the person in Britain has representation in Congress and the American doesn't, but that might be worth not having representation. Can I say that? I didn't expect that to be the margin.
A New Englander, 1 shilling. But it is the manner in which the British government goes about raising...
That's crazy. That's a crazy fact I just learned.
But it is the manner in which the British government goes about raising taxes that will put it and the colonies on a collision course.
If America looks to Great Britain for protection, she must enable us to protect her. If she expects our fleet, she must assist our revenue. Edmund Burke, Member of Parliament, 1765.
British Prime Minister George Grenville is determined to fix the country's spiralling debt crisis. He believes new colonial...
Guys, when was the first introduction of these powdered wigs, the classic powdered wigs of, you know, that kind of define the 17th century, you know, British? And I'm curious when it started and why it started. Like, did some guy just be like, I'm balding or something and I want a nice wig, and then it just caught on? Or was there some ceremonial
taxes spiraling debt crisis?
A trend?
He believes new colonial taxes must be part of the solution. In 1764, he proposes 2 new revenue-raising measures. a Sugar Act, which actually lowers the tax on foreign sugar and molasses, but only as part of a determined effort to ensure more effective collection. And a Stamp Act, which will tax all commercial and legal documents, from newspapers and playing cards to attorneys' licenses and land grants. These relatively minor taxes are not expected to cause much fuss. Englishmen have been paying them for 70 years. But to the surprise of the British government, the reaction in the colonies is uproar. The Stamp Act particularly hits merchants, lawyers and business owners, the most articulate and influential members of colonial society. They condemn the measures in newspapers and a flood of pamphlets.
This tax will deprive us of all our invaluable rights and privileges. It will drain us suddenly of our cash.
Did we sound like that?
Valuable rights and privileges. It will drain us suddenly of our cash. Occasion an entire stagnation of trade. Discourage every kind of industry. And involve us in the most abject slavery.
That's ironic. Anyways.
Opposition focuses less on the financial burden than on the principle of consent. Americans protest that they have no representation in the British Parliament and can accept.
I imagine like a slave owner reading that. Like, they're making us into slaves. And then you have an actual slave, like, really, dude?
No taxation without representation.
Yeah, I understand the no taxation without representation mindset. And information wasn't as widely available back then. But this tax will derive us of all our invaluable rights and privileges and drain our cash. I mean, you're looking back to how much less they were taxed compared to... Why am I defending... Sorry, phone call. But if it's about representation, that's fine. But you're also not getting taxed nearly as much as them. So I guess you can't have it both ways.
Slavery burden than on the principle of consent. Americans protest that they have no representation in the British Parliament and can accept no taxation without representation. It is their rights as British subjects, they point out, rights protected by the British Constitution, that are being trampled on. Prime Minister George Grenville argues the American colonies have virtual representation in Parliament. That is, their interests are represented in a general way by all British MPs.
That doesn't make any sense. Sorry, guys, I locked someone out. I was like, why are they calling me? Sorry.
There's have virtual representation in Parliament.
What is the difference between virtual representation and no representation? I don't see the difference. It's like, don't worry, you're represented because we're representing you. But, you know.
That is, their interests are represented in a general way by all British MPs. After all, even most Britons don't have the right to vote in a general election. Grenville's argument does not win many backers, even in Parliament itself, where electoral reform is a fierce battleground.
There is an idea, in some, that the colonies are virtually represented in the House. I would fain know by whom an American is represented here. Is he represented by any knight of the Shire in any county in this kingdom? Or will you tell him that he is represented by any representative of a borough which perhaps its own representatives never saw? This is what is called the rotten part of the Constitution. It cannot continue a century.
The Speaker is Pitt the Elder, a renowned former prime minister, who adds
that this kingdom has no right to lay a tax upon the colonies.
Okay, interesting. So the Americans weren't necessarily asking for all American, or they weren't Americans yet. The British colonists living in the colonies weren't asking for universal representation. They were just asking for a similar amount of representation as was in the British Isles or in Britain itself. Okay. What greater glory can New England see than stamped men hanging from a tree, inscribed on an effigy of Andrew Oliver, tax collector? Well,
throughout 1765, colonial assemblies meet to protest against the new acts. In the Virginia House of Burgesses, Patrick Henry
First Congress.
emerges as one of the most radical leaders of colonial resistance. He proposes a series of resolutions, which are adopted by the House.
Resolved, that the first adventurers and settlers of His Majesty's colony and dominion of Virginia.
it's kind of confusing me that a little that they're using like modern day American accents. And wouldn't it have been more accurate to use a more British style accent for American colonists?
The first adventurers and settlers of His Majesty's.
I mean, they had been. It's not as if the separation began when independence became a thing, and so maybe there was a change in accent over the decades, almost centuries of people living there. But
Colony and dominion of. That the first adventurers and settlers of His Majesty's colony and dominion of Virginia brought with them all the liberties, privileges, and immunities that have at any time been held, enjoyed, and possessed by the people of Great Britain. Resolved, that the taxation of the people by themselves, or by persons chosen by themselves to represent them, is the only security against a burdensome taxation.
But there are bitter divisions within the Virginia Assembly. Some members believe Patrick Henry goes too far. Loyalty to Britain and the British Crown is deep-rooted. Conservative members succeed in removing his most radical resolution, that only Virginia's assembly has the authority to raise taxes in the colony. Among the regular observers at these debates, a brilliant 22-year-old law clerk named Thomas Jefferson. The divisions in Virginia are mirrored across the colonies as debate grows more heated and protests turn violent. Tax collectors are beaten up by mobs, driven out of town, or forced to resign. Tax documents are destroyed. Effigies of royal governors are burned or hanged from liberty trees. Meanwhile, delegates from 9 of the 13 colonies meet in New York, where they draft a petition to the British King, George III, and Parliament. While assuring Crown and Parliament of their unwavering loyalty, the delegates declare that it is their right as Englishmen to have no taxes imposed upon them without their consent. Colonial merchants begin to organize a boycott of British goods. The uproar, the possible damage to trade, plus the fact that taxes are clearly unenforceable, finally forces the British government to back down. The following year, 1766, the Sugar Act and Stamp Act are scrapped by a new British Prime Minister, Lord Rockingham. The colonies have won a major victory. But the British Parliament does not back down over its right to raise taxes in America. The same day it repeals the taxes, it declares,
Parliament assembled had, hath, and of right ought to have full power and authority to make laws and statutes of sufficient force and validity to bind the colonies and people of America, in all cases whatsoever.
I love this sort of gentlemanly argument at the beginning, right? Where you're trying to, like, there's this power struggle. Obviously, all the power, most of the power is in the people in the British Isles, the main British government. But it's strange how it's like, okay, we'll withdraw these taxes, but your main gripe for those taxes, I'm still doing it. So it's almost like, all right, fine. It's almost like they're saying, like, oh, their problem is with these taxes here. But that doesn't mean we can't just create new taxes. That's interesting. And I understand the balancing act that Great Britain has to play, in that, you know, it's not looking good over there, but we also don't want to seem too weak, because being too weak could just make the thought of independence even stronger. And so it's interesting, this balancing act.
The words seem calculated to outrage America's colonial assemblies and convince many that though this storm has...
It seems almost like that was a statement to, not to Americans, but to other British people in the British Parliament. It's like, see, we withdrew these two taxes that they had a problem with, and they're still angry. But it seems like it was calculated that way, as if they're not really even talking to the colonists. They're more talking to Parliament, just to give them a reason to get more support for a more brutal crackdown, you know?
Past colonial assemblies, and convince many that though this storm has passed, another will surely follow.
Suppose a military force is sent into America. They will not find a rebellion. They indeed make one. They may indeed make one. Benjamin Franklin. Suppose a military force sent to America. They will not find a rebellion. Oh, okay. So it's like there isn't a rebellion now, but you doing that will create it. Got it. Excuse me. Water down the wrong pipe.
1767. 1 year on, Parliament passes a new series of measures to raise revenue from the colonies and demonstrate its authority over them. They are named after the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Peter
The
Townsend?
Acts.
Oh, Charles Townsend. What is Peter Townsend? Why does that sound familiar?
In the 13 colonies, they are met with howls of protest. Royal administrators are chased out of towns. Some tax officials are tarred and feathered, a brutal punishment where the victim is paraded through the streets covered in scalding tar. A new term emerges for these rabble-rousers: patriots. Colonists who seek to avoid confrontation with Parliament become known as loyalists.
It makes the word terrorist seem a bit more silly, with the amount that America uses the word terrorist, because you are a terrorist to British people. That's one of the things I've learned as I've gotten older, is terrorist is a nothing term. Like, it means nothing. It's just like trying to label someone badly that is hurting you. That's a terrorist.
Many communities and even families will soon be divided between these two camps, though for now, most are somewhere in the middle. Among the patriots in New England are a group calling themselves the Sons of Liberty.
Yeah. I love that flag, by the way. I wish that was our flag.
They include merchant and smuggler John Hancock, physician Joseph Warren, and silversmith Paul Revere.
One by land, two by sea.
The crisis comes to a head in Massachusetts. Boston has been a hotbed of patriot activity since the Stamp Act. and tension rises when British soldiers are quartered here in 1768.
This channel is so good.
March 1770, an altercation between soldiers and locals turns into a tense standoff.
Boston Massacre.
Taunted by an angry crowd, hundreds strong, pelted with snowballs and rocks, the small British detachment loses its nerve and opens fire.
I think 5 people are killed or something.
Five local men are killed. The Boston Massacre, as it becomes known, is powerful propaganda for the Patriot cause.
That's exactly how my history professor said that in college. I originally went to college at St. John's University in New York City, and then I finished up my degree at Providence College in Providence, Rhode Island, capital of my own state. And I remember him saying, you know, when you think of a massacre, right? Does that sound like it to you? No, but it was very useful propaganda. He said it kind of exactly like that.
The news carried in pamphlets and prints, the most famous created by Paul Revere. Blood has been spilt. Emotions are running high.
This is one of the most... I hate hypocrisy, okay? It's the most frustrating concept in humans to me. I don't say that I'm not guilty of it myself sometimes, but like if you were being thrown, if you had your troops in some country or colony where they were throwing rocks and shells at you, and then you returned fire and killed 5 people, you'd be completely fine with it. But if it suits your interest, I'm not saying this is an American thing or like just it's how stuff works. If it suits your interest, then call it this and act this way. I understand it, but it's just so frustrating.
Let the 5th of March never be forgot.
Writes Bostonian Samuel Savage.
Remember
the
5th of March?
Many anticipate a downward spiral into violence and disorder.
So that was kind of like the Fort Sumter moment of the revolution? The inhabitants are greatly enraged, and not without reason. Diary of John Roe, Boston merchant, 5th of March, 1770.
Despite the bloodshed in Boston, there are many on both sides who seek to de-escalate the crisis between British, Loyalists and Patriots. The British governor of Massachusetts, Thomas Hutchinson, withdraws the troops from Boston and has those involved in the shooting put on trial. They are acquitted of murder thanks to the efforts of their skilled lawyer, a noted patriot, John Adams.
Oh, Adams. I remember hearing about that.
In Britain, there is a new Prime Minister, Lord North, a close friend of the King and staunch advocate of parliamentary authority. He will serve in the role for the next 12 years. The economic damage of colonial boycotts persuades him to repeal Townsend's new taxes, all but one on tea. Relative calm returns to the colonies. The boycott is lifted. A second crisis has been weathered. But in New England, hostility towards the British government lingers. Here, local merchants rely on ships and trade, and have long resented British imperial rules, which restrict their commerce with other nations. Many patriots, like John Hancock, make extra money by smuggling goods into the colonies, bypassing British import duties. British efforts to clamp down on smuggling do not make them any more popular. Royal Navy warships are used to inspect and seize vessels belonging to prominent local figures, like John Hancock. To the outrage of New England merchants, the British also begin trying suspected smugglers in special Vice Admiralty courts, rather than the more sympathetic local courts.
Beautiful
In
painting.
1772, the Sons of Liberty hit back, boarding the Royal Navy schooner HMS Gaspé and setting it
Rhode Island.
ablaze.
This happened in Rhode Island, I'm pretty positive. Near Warwick, Rhode Island. Or Cranston, I think Warwick. Narragansett Bay. This happened right here, not far from me. Like, not far at all. I could easily drive here very quickly.
Meanwhile, in Britain, the Empire's largest corporation is on the verge of bankruptcy. The East India Company has a monopoly on British trade with India, China, and the East Indies. But a credit crisis now threatens its survival. In 1773, to help keep the company afloat, Parliament grants it the right to sell tea directly to the American colonies. The company also receives tariff exemptions that will make its tea cheaper than that of the local smugglers. But a small tax of 3 pence per
3%.
pound of tea remains in place. The new
3%
Tea
tax.
Act thus threatens the profits of local smugglers and provokes patriots on the principle of taxation without representation.
I'm kind of laughing at the smuggler part. It's like, oh crap, it's not as bad anymore. My profits are gone.
Taxation. As 7 company ships cross the Atlantic, packed with 250 tons of tea, the Sons of Liberty and others pressure tea dealers to reject the shipments. When one ship arrives in Philadelphia, thousands of locals threaten anyone who helps to unload its cargo. Most of the ships are forced to turn back. In Boston, however, Governor Thomas Hutchinson has had enough of boycotts. He ensures that 3 company ships enter the harbor. On a December evening in 1773, members of the Sons of Liberty board the ships
Dressed as
disguised
natives.
as Native Americans. They've chosen these costumes as a symbol of their new American identity. They break
Again, a bit ironic.
open
Not a bit, very.
340 chests of tea and dump the contents into the harbor. 92,000
It's like that's 2 ironic statements with like, oh, it's slavery while you have slaves, and oh, we're like Native Americans. It's like you did that, you did worse to natives. So I understand the symbolism, but looking back on it, irony is hard to miss.
92,000 pounds of tea in all, with a value today of nearly $2 million. Patriots celebrate the Boston Tea Party as a bold act of defiance. And it is just the most famous of several such acts in numerous ports and towns. According to Patriot lawyer John Adams,
this is the most magnificent movement of all. There is a dignity, a majesty, a sublimity in this last effort of the Patriots that I greatly admire. The people should never rise without doing something to be remembered, something notable and striking.
John Adams seems to me like a interesting a character in the American Revolution who was kind of trying to sit on a fence, you know? Like a good example is being a lawyer in defense of the British soldiers from the Boston Massacre. and it seems like he wasn't like full on revolutionary from the beginning. I don't
The reaction
know that,
in
but
London is rather different. The British government sees only lawlessness, mob rule, and an outrageous attack on private property. Enough is enough. If the government does not act firmly now, its authority in North America will lie in tatters. The time for restraint is over. The gloves are coming off. Today, there are probably more.
I would say that this sort of conflict that is about to happen was inevitable far before the Tea Party and before the Boston Massacre. I was about to say it, but I thought I was already pausing quite a bit, so I decided not to. But as soon as the kind of slightly polite returning of like, hey, these aren't okay taxes. Yeah, okay, we'll get rid of them. But we do have authority over you. I think that's when everything was set in motion, because now you have the egos of two populations that aren't going to settle, right? And so I don't think this is the turning point. I think this is all inevitable already.
High-quality history documentaries being made than at any time in history. Yet at the same time, it's getting harder and harder to find the good ones amidst the...
I'm going to watch through the ad, guys. If you're not, then thank you for watching. Be great if you do. But if you do watch through it and something interests you, especially with new videos that I'm watching, this came out only 9 days ago, please make sure to use the promo codes and links. Original link, top of the description. Fantastic video, guys.
Flood of
Thanks for
derivative
learning
videos,
with me.
misleading titles, and the worst of AI-generated content. So instead of losing precious time trawling the internet, many of our viewers are turning to another option, the prestige streaming service Nebula. Nebula is built and curated by creators like us.
Imagine he also
which means
mentioned,
that
like,
here,
and stupid
you're
reactors.
guaranteed
I would
to
have been
find
like, oh god.
high-quality videos
Oh no.
made with passion and integrity about fascinating topics.
Excuse me.
Right now, we're getting our fix of history and engineering with Mustard, a brilliant channel that examines curious engineering projects and amazing machines from our past. The stories are gripping, and the visuals and animations.
I have this video in one of my
in
one of my tabs
from our past.
up top.
The stories are gripping,
right here,
and the
the
visuals
Soviet
and animations are superb.
aircraft carrier.
Mustard's huge catalogue includes several videos only available on Nebula, including a Nebula original documentary on the development of the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber. There are hundreds of other great creators on Nebula across all genres, so if engineering isn't your thing, you're still sure to find something you'll love. From original movies and entertainment series, to documentaries covering everything from art to food, gaming, and of course, history. The History homepage shows just how much Nebula has to offer, including
Harris.
Nebula Originals, only available to subscribers. Right now, Nebula is the most interesting, fastest growing, independent video platform on the internet. And because Nebula fairly rewards its creators, your sign-up actively supports channels like ours, as we work hard to create ever more ambitious history content.
History is so good.
We've got a great
Voice
discount
crack.
for Epic History viewers. The link in our video description gets you 40% off Nebula's annual plan. That's just $36 a year, or $3 a month.
I want to make sure to at least make sure to get to the point where they show the promo codes and the / Epic History. If you're interested in that, guys, please use it. If anyone's still here, love y'all. Appreciate any comments down below. If you disagree with anything I said, call me out. I'd love to see it. You're always great in the comments. Any comments at all, love to see it. Greatly appreciate it. Hopefully I'll see you guys next time. We'll keep on learning. Bye, guys.